Well, very good morning, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, and friends of good governance. And that you are all here assembled. This is my third official visit to this country, to Sofia. The first one occurred in connection with the drafting of the governance code. That was well achieved. The second one was to help with getting the scorecard for good governance forward. That was achieved. And my third visit coincides with the launch of the Governance Commission. And I'm delighted that this is taking place today because this is an important step in getting good governance implemented. Nothing good with just having a framework and having a scorecard. It can only work if the people themselves do it and they recognize the good effects of good governance. That good governance makes eminent sense for all parties is no longer disputed. There's plenty of research these days that confirms that doing your homework on good governance is helpful not only for increasing the returns of the companies and the returns for the investors. It's also good for other stakeholders, the employees, the general public, the clients. They all benefit from the key elements of good governance, which is transparency, sufficient independence, and many other facets that are already well known to you. The real case for driving good governance is sufficient self-interest. Good governance, if it's only a nice-to-have thing, will never fly. People will say, yes, 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 we can do it, but you and everybody who's involved in company lives must recognize that the self-interest is there, that the better results are coming, and that it is inevitable to do this in the right fashion. So I'm delighted to be here on this important occasion, and I'm happy to give you a little background of the German developments and the lessons or the experiences that we have had in this process. Very obviously, Germany is not the inventor of good governance, but we followed it when it became a more known thing in the UK and also the United States in the early 90s. We followed this. We didn't know what good governance was in detail, but we knew that many German companies were not transparent enough. And we went to them as large investors. DWS has 2 million clients, 150 billion euros of invested monies, and we went to these companies and said, your underperformance is due that you are not transparent enough, that you are not independent enough with your advisors. And these were the key reasons. Companies were not happy at our instigation and said, yeah, and they complained the other way around, back through the banking sector and some others. But in the end, I think we persevered and good governance found its way. Nevertheless, there were mistakes made of sufficient size. And when a big construction company, Holzmann, the biggest in the country, that had a long tradition, and was, however, one that said, for us, we are so good, all these rules of transparency and independence and whatnot do not really apply. And they went bust. And then the German government, because they employed so many people, got into the act. They set up the first commission that drafted the general lay of the land for good governance, and then the second commission that came up with a governance code in 2002. That meant how we got forward in this whole thing. So I have a few charts here. Let's see how I can work them. Is anybody willing to make the move? Let's see. Insider rules. There were first an attempt to do this in a voluntary way. That failed, and then a law had come. In corporate governance, obviously, we want to have as much self-regulation as we can, and therefore we needed some kind of bridge, how to make it mandatory to at least implement the comply or explain principle. And so the law was enacted that it becomes mandatory on an annual basis to comply with the code or explain deviations. 3 elements: the legal stipulations, because the code wants to give an overall picture of good governance. So it has obviously references to the legal background, but then the key elements of the code are the shall recommendations. These are the very important points. They also reflect key international governance standards. Then we have the should suggestions. They are perhaps not as big as the shall recommendations, but they are equally very important for good governance. And they define in many ways the way how a company really is serious about the whole thing. Let's have a quick look at what are the key issues of corporate governance monitoring. I understand here you have either a unitary board or you have a dual board. In Germany we have just a dual board system, which I think has a slight preference, because it's very clear that the supervisory board is there to supervise and control, and on the other hand the management board, the Vorstand, is there to do the business. And this sort of differentiation of task has proven pretty helpful. Here you have both ways, so that's why I'm saying non-executive board member issues, because they can be either on the supervisory board or non-executives on the unitary board. What is so key here in the whole thing is sufficient independence and expertise. It's not easy to find sufficiently independent board members, and that is always a problem in rapidly developing countries. Here's one. Saying he wants to do good service. What is so important is not only formal independence, the independence in mind, to be able to say, because of experience and good reasons, to say no. And that is what so many companies just will not have, and they have very strong CEOs and very strong chairmen, and they don't want to have sufficiently independent board members, and that is something that is so vital, because after all is human, and the strong CEO goes at one point, and then the company is left with a poor situation. So what we need to support the good board work is more and more committees. Things have become so complex that, particularly in the financial sector, that without a proper audit committee, without a good risk committee and a compliance committee, the board work will be inferior. Obviously it varies. This is all relevant for the very big companies. For a smaller company, you may have a